Chapter 1. Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. The men in black walk a line between mystery and menace. They materialize without warning, beside a parked car, in a hallway, at your doorstep. Their appearance is always the same. Black suits crisp as new paper, polished shoes gleaming, faces pale, and eyes that seem to penetrate your very thoughts. Who are they? Government agents. Something far more enigmatic? They arrive after UFO sightings, after encounters with strange lights and unknown craft. They come when evidence emerges that was never meant to be seen. And when they leave, uncertainty remains. Decades of stories tell the same unsettling tale. Before diving into one such encounter, what do you think these visitors represent? Share your thoughts below. Herbert Hopkins' Old Orchard Beach visit. 1976. On a quiet evening in 1976, Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a respected physician and part-time UFO investigation consultant, sat alone in his Old Orchard Beach home. Neatly organized papers about an ongoing case lay spread across his desk. An unexpected phone call interrupted his work. The voice was calm, precise. A fellow researcher wanting to discuss the very case Hopkins was investigating. No urgency, just a clear implication that this conversation needed to happen that evening. Hopkins agreed. Minutes later, a knock echoed at the front door. The visitor was extraordinary, thin to the point of fragility, with skin so pale it seemed bloodless. A perfectly tailored black suit hung on his frame without a single wrinkle. A derby hat casting shadows across his face. As the man entered, details emerged that would haunt Hopkins forever. His skin looked almost waxen, stretched uniformly like a second skin. Lips an unnatural, vivid red, so sharply defined they appeared painted. His movements were mechanical, precise, smooth, lacking the unconscious adjustments that mark living beings. Hopkins, trained to read human subtleties, found himself deeply unsettled. In the living room, the visitor wasted no time with conversation. His questions were direct, as if he already knew every detail of the UFO case and merely sought confirmation. Nor, the encounter began with an intense focus on witnesses, physical evidence, and storage details. Throughout their conversation, the man maintained unwavering eye contact with Hopkins. At one point, he produced a small coin, rolling it deliberately between his fingers. Hopkins watched intently as the coin inexplicably began to fade, its edges blurring, shine diminishing, until it completely dissolved. "You will stop your work on this case," the man stated flatly, his tone devoid of emotion or threat. He continued questioning Hopkins, seemingly testing the consistency of his responses. As the discussion progressed, the man's behavior transformed. His speech became slower, punctuated by deliberate pauses, and his movements grew increasingly rigid and mechanical. "My energy is running low. I must leave," he finally announced. With precise movements, he adjusted his derby hat and walked to the door. Hopkins followed him onto the porch, watching as the man descended the steps and disappeared into darkness. No sound of a vehicle accompanied his departure. That night triggered an immediate and thorough response from Hopkins. He went to his office and systematically destroyed every single UFO research file. Case notes, photographs, and transcripts vanished before morning. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Colleagues found Hopkins unreachable. When one finally connected with him, his responses were curt and final. "I'm stepping away from that work," he'd say, offering no further explanation. A scheduled research visit was abruptly canceled. Local changes were subtler but noticeable. The Historical Society librarian observed Hopkins's sudden disengagement from his previous research interests, where he had been calling frequently about unusual aerial phenomena. He now completely disappeared. Neighbors noted changes too. His home became more private, with curtains drawn and porch light extinguished. nor word spread quietly about this incident, not through major news outlets, but through intimate channels, letters, phone calls, and hushed conversations among UFO investigators. The core narrative remained consistent, even as minor details shifted with each retelling. At its heart was an enduring image: a pale man in a black suit who appeared swiftly after a phone call, performed an inexplicable act with a coin, and left behind a mysteriously halted investigation. Speculation emerged rapidly about the visitor's origins. Some pointed to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, referencing its history of managing UFO witness interactions. Others suspected the FBI, drawing on its past surveillance of civilian researchers. Yet many viewed it as a quintessential man in black encounter, struck by the visit's extraordinary precision and its complete disruption of Hopkins' work. His professional transformation was swift and absolute. At a small New England conference months later, an oblique reference drew knowing glances from those familiar with the details. By month's end, Hopkins had completely withdrawn from UFO correspondence. When an old colleague unexpectedly visited, Hopkins greeted him warmly but deflected any discussion of the case. "It's closed," he would say, quickly shifting conversation to mundane topics like fishing and local news. More subtle changes followed. Hopkins stopped attending evening gatherings where local enthusiasts shared unusual stories. His interest in fringe topics vanished entirely. One former colleague summarized it bluntly: the pride piece. Man, he knew, had been endlessly curious about even the strangest claims. After that night, that curiosity disappeared completely. In subsequent years, the Herbert Hopkins case settled into a quiet but persistent corner of men in black folklore. It was referenced in books, mentioned in lectures, and debated in small circles. Its power stemmed not from physical evidence, but from its stark narrative: a lone man, a brief encounter, a single inexplicable moment, and the total silencing of a dedicated researcher. Hopkins never publicly expanded beyond his original account. When later asked about the incident, he would simply state, "It happened exactly as I said it did. I've said all I need to say." For researchers of the Men in Black phenomenon, it remains a rare case where the mysterious visitor's purpose was achieved without overt intimidation or force. On a calm morning in June 1947, Harold Dahl was out on his small patrol boat in Puget Sound, Washington. With him were his son, their family dog, and 2 crewmen. Suddenly, 6 metallic discs appeared overhead, moving in a tight formation. One disc faltered, tilting and dropping a spray of molten debris. Fragments hissed into the water, with some striking the boat. A piece burned Dahl's son, while another killed the dog. Dahl steered clear as the formation regrouped and slipped west into the haze. He kept a few shards from the deck, some light and brittle, others unnervingly heavy. Back on shore, he shared the story only with a small circle: his boss, Fred Chrisman, and 2 close friends. Dahl had no interest in making the incident public, not even telling his wife. But by the following morning, something felt off. A call came to his home from an unfamiliar man. The voice was polite, yet left no room for refusal. The caller suggested meeting for breakfast at a Tacoma diner, naming the place and time before Dahl could respond. When Dahl arrived at the diner, the man was already seated in a booth near the back. Dressed in a black suit, crisp white shirt, and narrow black tie, with his hat neatly placed beside him, the man exuded an austere presence. As Dahl slid into the opposite seat, the stranger didn't offer a name or shake hands. He simply fixed Dahl with an unwavering gaze and began to speak. "You had quite an experience out there on the water," he said in a low, deliberate tone. Then, with remarkable precision, he described every detail: the number of craft, the movement of the wobbling disc, the debris spray, the injury to Dahl's son, the dog's death. Dahl sat in stunned silence, wondering how this man could know such specific information. At one point, the man leaned in slightly. He suggested it would be better for Dahl and his family to forget what he saw. There was no explicit threat, no visible anger, but the words carried a weight that implied the outcome was already decided. Dawn noticed the man's pale face and sharp yet oddly flat features, as if he were someone accustomed to minimizing expression. The conversation lasted barely 15 minutes. When it ended, the man stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without paying for his coffee. Through the diner's front window, Dahl watched him step into a black sedan. The Maury Island incident had left its mark, and Dahl knew something fundamental had changed that day. The morning was light as the car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind an impression that Dahl couldn't shake. The meeting felt different, not like an attempt to persuade, but more like a direct instruction delivered with absolute clarity. Something about how casually the man spoke of his son's injury struck Dahl. It wasn't just the knowledge itself, but the way it was shared, as if recounting something utterly mundane. That night, sleep eluded him as he repeatedly replayed the moment in his mind. In the following days, Dahl avoided discussing the sighting. When a local reporter inquired about rumors of strange discs over the Sound, he dismissed them as a misunderstanding. Within a week, he publicly retracted his entire account. However, the story had already spread beyond his control. Chrisman, still believing something extraordinary had occurred, wrote to an Army Air Force contact. He offered to show the debris and describe the incident. Soon, two intelligence officers, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, traveled from Hamilton Field to interview both men. The officers conducted extensive interviews, seeking precise details about times, positions, and object descriptions. They carefully examined the boat's damage and collected debris samples. Their records noted the material's unusual slag-like texture, distinctly different from common alloys. They also documented inconsistencies in Dahl's account, variations in event sequences, and uncertainty about exact distances. Whether these discrepancies stemmed from genuine confusion or Dahl's reluctance remained unclear. After completing their interviews, Davidson and Brown boarded their B-25 bomber to return to California, carrying the samples. Near Kelso, Washington, the plane caught fire and crashed, killing both men. The debris was completely destroyed in the blaze. Military channels quickly spread news of the crash, presenting it as a tragic accident. No mention was made of what the officers had been carrying. For Dahl, the event only solidified his decision to remain silent. He had been instructed to forget what he saw, and now two men were dead. Privately, he told a friend that the diner meeting felt less like a conversation and more like being unwillingly briefed on a situation he wanted no part of. Eventually, the Air Force issued a statement declaring the Maury Island case a hoax, citing Dahl's own retraction. Yet the timeline remained: a sighting, a mysterious encounter, and an unexplained tragedy. Not Harold Dahl's encounter on Maury Island marked the beginning of a pattern that would become infamous in Men in Black lore. What started as a seemingly ordinary moment, a brief encounter with mysterious discs, quickly transformed into something far more significant. The real story wasn't about the fleeting sighting, but about what came after. The visitor who appeared in the diner was deliberate and unavoidable. Unlike the discs, which were momentary, this man represented something more profound. Researchers noted his unusual approach, arriving without credentials or a name, yet wielding total conversational authority. He seemed less interested in the details of the sighting and more focused on Dahl's willingness to discuss it. In subsequent decades, similar reports began to emerge. Witnesses described unexpected visits from men in dark suits who possessed uncanny knowledge and issued instructions without explicit threats. A familiar scenario would unfold: a knock at the door, a black car waiting outside, and a stranger who already knew exactly what the witness had seen. The Robert Richardson incident in July 1967 perfectly embodied this emergent pattern. On a quiet, dim road just after midnight, the 19-year-old University of Toledo student experienced something extraordinary. After a metallic flash and a sharp bumper impact, he discovered a small, unusually cool silvery fragment, which he casually pocketed. 2 days later, the consequence arrived. 2 men in dark suits, one in his late 30s and the other around 50, stood expressionlessly on Richardson's porch. The older man cut directly to the point. "Mr. Richardson, you have something that does not belong to you." This visit, like others, left more questions than answers. The men's precision, their knowledge, and their unexplained appearance became hallmarks of a phenomenon that would fascinate researchers for years to come. The Maury Island incident had set the stage for a narrative that would repeat itself, with witnesses encountering mysterious figures who seemed to emerge from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. Note: Richardson was first approached by 2 men who seemed to operate with an unspoken authority. Their demeanor was calm but intimidating. They produced a notepad with his personal details, driver's license and university ID, and stated clearly, "We know where you are. We know what you have." When Richardson asked for identification, they ignored his request. No claims of official status were made. The younger man simply said it was important for Richardson's safety to comply. Their conversation was brief, lasting no more than 5 minutes. Richardson told them the metal piece had already been sent for analysis. The older man leaned in, lowering his voice with a warning. If Richardson was lying, consequences would follow. Without further discussion, they turned and walked to a black 1963 Cadillac sedan, which pulled away silently. 3 nights later, a different man arrived. Younger than the first pair, he wore a dark suit and pale gray fedora. Richardson later noted his skin had an unusual, unnaturally smooth texture. The man's tone was more conversational, but the message remained the same. The fragment must be returned. When Richardson again insisted the piece was no longer in his possession, the man smiled and said, "You will retrieve it." Then came a chilling threat. He asked how Richardson would feel if someone close to him was harmed, providing her full name and address. After delivering this threat, the man tipped his hat and walked away. From that moment, Richardson's sense of safety was forever altered. The UFO research group had already passed the fragment to a metallurgical expert, but the men's intimate knowledge of his life and their precise details continued to unsettle him. He slowly realized he was being watched. A black Cadillac repeatedly appeared near his apartment, sometimes idling at a distance, other times positioned just far enough away to make him uncertain whether he was truly under surveillance. His normal routines, grocery shopping, library visits, seemed inexplicably shadowed. Men in suits would position themselves strategically, one at the magazine rack, another in a diner's corner booth, always holding a newspaper but never actually reading it. Richardson shared his experiences with only a few people, including a university physics professor with an interest in UFO reports. The professor's response was ominous. "If those men are who I think they are, you don't want to test their patience." Despite these veiled threats, Richardson never contacted local law enforcement. In 1967, walking into a Toledo police station to report men in black suits threatening him over a UFO fragment seemed like a surefire way to be dismissed, or worse, attract unwanted attention from the very agencies he suspected were behind these encounters. Within the local UFO research community, whispers began circulating about Richardson's case. The National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena NICAP files contained similar reports. Physical trace UFO cases where witnesses who retrieved materials were subsequently visited by unidentified men, often presumed to be connected to the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations or another federal agency. In most instances, the retrieved materials disappeared permanently. When laboratory analysis of Richardson's fragment finally returned results, they remained inconclusive. While the lab noted unusual structural properties, they stopped short of declaring the material extraterrestrial. Before a second round of testing could be conducted, the fragment vanished under unexplained circumstances. As suddenly as they had begun, Richardson's encounters with the men in black ceased. The mysterious car disappeared. Outwardly, life resumed its normal rhythm. Yet an underlying sense of vulnerability, of being observed by forces beyond legal or rational understanding, never left him. In later interviews with UFO researchers, Richardson was consistently measured. He never definitively claimed the men were aliens or that the fragment originated from another world. Instead, he emphasized their unsettling demeanor, controlled, clinical, emotionless, and their seemingly impossible knowledge. In the spring of 1968, Jersey City's quiet morning was interrupted by an unsettling encounter. Mary Robinson was heading to work, her coat pulled tight against the morning chill, when she noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Behind the wheel sat a man in a dark suit, white shirt, and black tie, his face pale and features sharp, wearing an oddly fixed, unchanging expression. The man's gaze was locked directly on Mary. At first, she thought it might be an innocent coincidence, perhaps someone waiting for a friend or a neighbor. But something felt wrong. He didn't look away when she glanced in his direction, and his posture remained completely still. His eyes followed her as she walked toward the corner, and even after she turned down the block, an unnerving sense of being watched lingered. Jack Robinson, Mary's husband, was no stranger to such unusual attention. A respected figure in the New Jersey UFO research community, he had dedicated years to quietly gathering reports, interviewing witnesses, and submitting findings to national organizations. Recently, he had been focusing on a series of close encounter reports suggesting unusual activity in the area. His work would become part of a broader mystery surrounding unexplained encounters. Researchers would later view his case as a classic example of incidents where the goal wasn't to deny an event's occurrence, but to remove any physical evidence that could prove it happened. Richardson's experience became a textbook case in Men in Black literature, a scenario where physical evidence from a UFO encounter was followed by a swift and precise response from unidentified agents. The intimidation extended beyond the individual to those close to them, ultimately resulting in potential evidence being quietly removed from public reach. As Richardson himself once remarked, if they wanted peace, they could have taken it that night. Coming back twice was about something else. They wanted me to remember them. For many who study such phenomena, this represents the lasting impact of these encounters. While artifacts may vanish and sighting details may fade, the deliberate disruption of a witness's life leaves an indelible mark that decades cannot erase. The disarray was too deliberate to be an accident. Papers on her desk had been moved, a drawer slightly ajar that she swore she'd closed. Nothing was missing, but something felt off. Later, she spotted a man in a car, and her unease sharpened. She didn't tell Jack immediately. Instead, she noted the time, just after 8 a.m., and the license plate number. Strangely, the details seemed to slip from her memory minutes later. That evening, she asked Jack if anyone had contacted him recently about his work. He frowned and asked why. Mary described the man in the car. Listened intently, his expression tightening as she spoke about the suit and the unblinking stare. By the time she finished, he was already considering who might confirm if they were under observation. The next morning, the man returned. Same car, same position, same posture. This time, Mary saw him adjust something in his lap, perhaps a notebook or a small device. His gaze never left the front of their building. By the third day, Mary was convinced this wasn't random. She urged Jack to call someone. Jack reached out to Timothy Green Beckley, a fellow UFO researcher known for pursuing leads. Others avoided. Beckley didn't hesitate. He told them to stay put and contacted Jim Mosley, a photographer interested in documenting unusual phenomena. On the fourth day, a pale sunlight filtered over a black sedan parked across from the Robinsons' apartment. The man inside matched Mary's description perfectly. Dark suit, low-pulled hat, white shirt buttoned high, with a neatness that seemed almost staged. Beckley and Mosley approached on foot, maintaining a casual pace. Beckley noted the man's absolute stillness, no fidgeting, no impatience, as if he could sit indefinitely. Even as they passed, his gaze remained locked on the building. Mosley quickly snapped a photograph. The man didn't react. The man in the black sedan sat motionless, his presence seemingly unremarkable to those nearby. Beckley would later describe the scene as a living mannequin captured in a photograph, a grainy black and white image that would become legendary in Men in Black lore, with the shadow casting darkness over his eyes and a mouth set in an ambiguous line. Inside their apartment, Jack and Mary found some relief in knowing they weren't imagining things. Someone was definitely watching them. Jack's UFO research appeared benign on the surface, compiling reports, tracking rumors, and publishing in small newsletters, but recently, his work had taken a turn. Witnesses were sharing accounts that suggested tangible evidence, ground imprints, strange residues, and recovered objects. These emerging details raised questions. Could such claims attract unwanted attention? The Robinsons began speculating about the sedan's occupant. Was he connected to a formal investigative body like the FBI or Air Force Office of Special Investigations, agencies historically known for monitoring UFO-related cases? The possibility was unsettling. An authorized surveillance detail meant this mysterious figure could watch them indefinitely, with an authority they couldn't challenge. Mary noticed subtle disruptions. Apartment door locks seemed tampered with. A jewelry box had been moved with precise, unnerving accuracy, just 2 inches from its original position. Nothing was stolen, but something felt wrong. Jack's research papers showed signs of interference. Certain pages appeared copied, with edges slightly curled as if handled by damp fingers. A second figure emerged, another man in a dark suit, standing silently in the building's lobby during odd hours, always vanishing before Jack could confront him. Neighbors started asking questions, sensing something unusual was happening. What had begun as a single car outside had transformed into a more complex observation. Jack and Mary were caught in a web of unexplained monitoring, their privacy systematically invaded by unknown entities with uncertain motives. No. Jack and Mary noticed something odd about their apartment's surroundings. An old sedan regularly parked outside, occupied by a silent man who never engaged with them. 2 men in suits had previously walked past their door late one night without speaking or knocking. The tension grew slowly. Jack began checking the street before leaving home. Mary started drawing curtains during the day, worried about unseen watchers. Their phone calls felt strange, with occasional static and unexplained clicks. When Beckley and Mosley investigated, they approached the car more directly. Beckley greeted the man, who remained completely unresponsive. His lack of reaction was more unsettling than any direct threat. By the 10th day, the black sedan vanished without explanation. Life returned to normal, but the experience lingered. Jack became more cautious with his research, locking notes in a metal file cabinet and limiting discussions about his investigations. Mary never forgot the man's face or the heavy atmosphere his presence created. Mosley's photograph of the incident sparked debate among UFO researchers. Some argued the man was a government operative or private investigator monitoring Jack. Others saw it as evidence of something more mysterious, a classic men in black encounter captured in daylight. Years later, the Robinson case became a reference point in UFO literature. The image wasn't definitive proof, but it aligned with numerous other witness accounts of quiet, systematic surveillance. For Jack and Mary, it was less about public validation and more about a deeply personal intrusion into their lives. In 1961, a cold, silent night hung over Minot, North Dakota, unlike any other. Paul Miller, a young Air Force reservist, was returning from a hunting trip with 3 companions when something extraordinary disrupted their journey. Briefly, they spotted a glowing object hovering low in a nearby field. 2 strange figures emerged, moving oddly toward a fence line. Miller instinctively raised his rifle and fired. Suddenly, they found themselves back in the car, heading toward Minot Air Force Base. Their watches indicated hours had passed, yet none could remember leaving the field. No report was filed. Unspoken agreement among the 4 men was clear. Discussing such an incident on base could attract unwanted attention from intelligence officers. The next morning, Miller was at his desk when an authoritative call came through. "Stay where you are. Visitors are coming." Within an hour, 2 men arrived, dressed identically in dark suits, white shirts, and narrow black ties. Their pale faces bore fixed, nearly blank expressions. Without greeting, one stated flatly, "Mr. Miller, you had an encounter last night." He hadn't told anyone on base. The second man placed a folder on the desk. Inside lay a typed sheet detailing his name, address, family members, and service history down to his elementary school. Miller stared, then looked up. "You shot something you shouldn't have," the first man said. Miller felt his chest tighten. "Who told you that?" Silence was their only response. One leaned closer, speaking in a low, emotionless voice. "We know what you saw, and we know where you live. It would be best if you forgot." His presence had changed how they lived, even if only briefly. It was a reminder that being watched doesn't require direct confrontation. Sometimes, the most effective pressure leaves nothing tangible behind, except in this rare case, a single photograph and the memory of men who sat in silence. For reasons never explained, their brief encounter lasted no more than 10 minutes, and they left as suddenly as they arrived. From his office window, Miller watched them walk in perfect synchronization to a black sedan parked in a section of the base typically reserved for official vehicles. No one questioned the car's presence. The vehicle pulled away silently, and that evening, Miller's anxiety began to manifest. He checked every lock twice and kept his sesh rifle close. In the days that followed, a black car started appearing along the road to his home at unusual hours. Through his curtain, he spotted a man in dark sunglasses sitting motionless in the driver's seat, even under a gray sky. Miller's hunting companions started experiencing similar unsettling events. Strange cars would trail them for short distances. Men in suits would linger near their homes, vanishing when approached. Though no one discussed the encounters openly, the sense of surveillance was palpable and very real. On base, Miller noticed a shift in social dynamics. Conversations would abruptly stop when he entered a room. A uniformed colleague once hinted at contact from higher authorities before quickly changing the subject. One afternoon, 2 unidentified men in civilian clothing watched him intently near the mess hall, tracking his movements until he disappeared from view. The psychological impact was gradual but profound. Miller became hypervigilant, constantly checking rear-view mirrors, pausing before unlocking doors, and scanning parked vehicles. Routine sounds, a ringing phone, corridor footsteps, now triggered a sense of impending intrusion. His family observed the transformation. At dinner, he grew quieter. Late nights found him staring out windows for extended periods. When his wife inquired about his state of mind, he would deflect, but she recognized this was more than mere exhaustion. Within the tight-knit base community, whispers began to circulate. While no one confronted Miller directly, he sensed his name had become associated with something unusual. A mechanic he'd known well started avoiding eye contact. A colleague quietly advised him to be cautious about his interactions. Weeks turned into months, and the unease persisted. No Po Chin. Miller left the Air Force Reserve a few years after an incident that never truly left his memory. When researchers began documenting patterns of men in black visits during the late 1960s and early 70s, he instantly recognized the descriptions: the unshakable formality, strange knowledge, and quiet but heavy intimidation. Only in the late 1970s did Miller agree to share his full story with the UFO researcher. Even then he hesitated, worried that talking might summon them back. For years after the visit, he was haunted by nightmares of returning to his office and finding the two men already waiting. By the time his account entered UFO literature, the original sighting had become almost secondary. The focus was on the response precision and speed, how they approached within hours, armed with personal and military background, and issued a warning without official acknowledgement. Researchers noted the unusual coordination. If these men were from recognized agencies like OSI, Air Force Intelligence, or the CIA, why hadn't they identified themselves? And if their goal was silencing Miller, why make their presence so obvious? Miller didn't dwell on broader theories. For him, this was a memory etched sharply in his mind. He remembered the slight delay before each man spoke, as if following an internal rhythm. Their footsteps matched exactly when leaving, shoulders never shifting, not a hair out of place. Decades later, Miller kept the telling sparse. He would sometimes conclude by saying, "I was the quiet that got to me. They didn't have to yell. They already knew I'd remember every word." Among those who heard him, the impact was lasting. In small UFO discussion groups and private correspondences, his case became a clear example of men in black behavior, built entirely on controlled presence and the weight of implied authority. Some admitted it wasn't the warning's content that disturbed them, but the possibility of such an encounter happening so quickly. In 1953, Albert K. Bender's life took an unexpected turn. Far from being a casual observer, he was the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, a small but growing network of UFO enthusiasts who traded sightings and theories by mail. His top-floor apartment at 784 Broad Street served as the Bureau's headquarters, every surface cluttered with files and correspondence. That summer, Bender had been preparing an issue of his Space Review Bulletin. He believed he was close to solving the UFO mystery and planned to reveal his conclusion in the next issue. But everything changed suddenly. The transformation began with subtle, unsettling signs. Strange heaviness would fill the air when he worked at his desk at night. Sometimes a faint odor of sulfur or ozone would drift in. His thoughts would blur, and a pressure would build behind his eyes. One evening in late July, these sensations intensified dramatically. Alone in his apartment, he watched the clock tick past 9 as the air seemed to drop in temperature. The desk lamp's light dimmed without flickering. Then he realized he wasn't alone. 3 identical men stood in the room. They had not entered through the door. Dressed in black suits, black hats, narrow black ties, and crisp white shirts, they appeared almost supernatural. Their skin was pale, almost gray, and their eyes possessed a strange, luminous quality as if light reflected from within. They did not sit. They did not remove their hats. The tallest spoke in a low, flat voice without any particular accent. They informed Bender that they knew about his UFO research and told him to stop. Bender sat frozen, hands on his knees. While they did not explicitly threaten him, their message was unequivocal. This encounter would become a defining moment, demonstrating that these mysterious visitors, whether government agents or something more enigmatic, operated with absolute certainty. They arrived and departed at will, leaving behind a charged silence that spoke volumes. For those who experienced such encounters, the aftermath was never truly empty, but filled with the knowledge that any future visit would not be by chance. And Bender's encounter began with a disorienting experience. His voice emerged weakly as one of the men approached. A metallic glint caught his eye, something smooth and curved peeking from beneath a shirt cuff. Dizziness swept over him, blurring his vision momentarily. When clarity returned, the men had vanished. The following days passed in a strange fog. Headaches intensified. He lost track of time, neglecting correspondence and drifting through the city, leaving the office early and aimlessly wandering. In early September, they returned. Bender was resting, battling another headache when the air thickened with a familiar sulfuric metallic scent. 3 figures materialized at his bedside. This time, no verbal warning came. Instead, they communicated a sense that he was approaching some profound truth. Bender would later describe the communication as a mix of spoken words and thoughts that seemed to materialize fully formed in his mind. One of them produced a small circular object with a surface that shifted like liquid metal. A sudden chill ran through him as the room seemed to recede. Their words became muffled, distant, before consciousness slipped away. Upon waking, the room was empty. Hours had vanished. Within a week, he made a decisive move. The International Flying Saucer Bureau was closed. In the October issue of Space Review, he published a cryptic notice. The flying saucer mystery was solved, but information was being withheld by a higher authority. No explanation followed. No subsequent issue appeared. To his members, this made no sense. The Bureau had been thriving with an expanding international network. Its sudden, unexplained cessation bewildered everyone. Publicly, Bender remained silent. Privately, he shared minimal details with a few correspondents, never identifying the visitors. Years would pass before he spoke on record. In 1962, his book Flying Saucers and the Three Men revealed an extraordinary account. He described the visitors not as ordinary men in black suits, but as otherworldly entities capable of appearing and disappearing at will. Their presence brought an unnatural cold and a distinctive, unmistakable odor. If SB came to an abrupt end in 1953, sending ripples through the tight-knit UFO community, his shutdown was preceded by extraordinary encounters that would become a pivotal reference point in Men in Black research. Bender claimed he had been shown visions of another world and a reason for secrecy. While skeptics dismissed his account as imagination, supporters highlighted the timing and consistency of his story. His private letters to friends predated his book and contained consistent warnings about his experiences. The encounters themselves were notable for their precision. Unidentified men arrived without names or identification, delivering instructions without argument. They did not return after Bender complied with their directives. Investigators later noted shared elements in his account: black suits, an unnatural room stillness, invasive knowledge of his activities, and an unspoken pressure to abandon his research. Following these encounters, Bender married, moved away, and withdrew from public UFO investigation. The IFSB, which had lasted just 2 years, ended with members left only with a single sentence and an instruction obeyed. In subsequent decades, similar stories emerged. People described men who looked almost identical, appearing in pairs or threes with flat voices and predetermined questions. Some were told to destroy photographs, others to hand over debris, and some simply to forget. By 1953, Bender was among the first to face these mysterious men and stop completely. If flying saucers were the mystery, these men were the consequence, returning unannounced, unshaken, and already knowing what had been witnessed, collected by Gray Barker from the 1950s to 1960s in Clarksburg, West Virginia. continue to intrigue those fascinated by the unexplained, a mystery that captivated many across America. By day, he worked for a film distribution company, but his nights were dedicated to investigating unexplained encounters. Though he had never met Albert Bender in person, they had maintained a correspondence through their bureau, exchanging clippings and accounts of sightings from their respective regions. When Bender suddenly went silent, Barker's journalistic instincts kicked in. He began collecting notes, letters, and interviews, piecing together a potential explanation. A letter from one of Bender's contacts suggested he had been personally persuaded to stop his investigations. In late autumn of 1953, Barker traveled to Bridgeport. The salty air from Long Island Sound greeted him as he stepped off the train. Bender agreed to meet, but only in the neutral territory of a hotel lobby. Barker arrived early, watching dim light from wall lamps create yellow circles on the carpet. When Bender appeared, he looked noticeably thinner than in photographs, with shadowed eyes. Their conversation lasted less than 30 minutes. Bender didn't reveal specifics, but phrases like higher source and it's best to leave it alone hinted at something beyond ordinary secrecy. Barker sensed Bender was holding back, with unspoken words hanging in the air. After they parted, Barker headed toward the elevator. Halfway down the hallway, he realized he wasn't alone. A man stood ahead, his features blurred in shadow. Initially mistaking him for another guest, Barker soon noticed the man's distinct appearance: a black suit, white shirt, narrow tie, and a hat in hand. The hallway felt unnaturally silent. No voices emerged from other rooms. No sounds drifted from the lobby. Even the light fixtures seemed to hum more quietly. When the man finally spoke, his voice was flat and accentless. "You won't get what you're looking for." It wasn't a question or a threat, but a statement of absolute certainty. Before Barker could respond, the man stepped into the next corridor and disappeared. When Barker followed a moment later, the hall was empty, with no sign of which door the man might have used. Known the years following a peculiar discovery, Barker's UFO investigations took an increasingly strange turn. What began as collecting reports evolved into gathering accounts of silent, unsettling encounters. Letters described mysterious men arriving in black cars, asking probing questions and telling witnesses to forget what they'd seen. Henderson's story in 1961 caught Barker's attention. A part-time radio technician from West Virginia, Henderson had reported a low-level disc sighting to a local newspaper. Shortly after, two men in black suits appeared at his home. They knew details that seemed impossible: the exact time he'd gone outside, the direction he'd been facing, and that he'd taken a Polaroid photograph. When Barker drove to meet Henderson, the landscape was stark: low hills and bare winter trees rattling in the wind. Henderson's yard contained only an old sedan. Inside, the witness was visibly nervous, fidgeting with his wristwatch as he recounted the visit. The men had arrived just after sundown, entering without invitation. They never introduced themselves. One briefly flashed a card with unreadable lettering before tucking it away. Their message was chilling: Henderson wouldn't want to keep the photograph. They claimed it would fade into insignificance. Barker requested to see the photo. Henderson retrieved an envelope and slid it across the table. The image was peculiar, pale and washed out, not from age, but as if its very essence had been drained. A faint circular outline hovered over the terrain, the rest nearly white. As Barker studied the photograph, an unnatural silence descended. The wall clock's tick became the only sound. Glancing out the window, he spotted a black sedan idling at the edge of the drive. Two figures sat inside, their faces turned towards the house. The experience reinforced what Barker had long suspected. These weren't simple encounters, but carefully orchestrated interactions where someone else seemed to be controlling the narrative from the start. By the late 1950s, He'd become known in the UFO community not just as a collector of stories, but as someone who recognized deeper patterns. But Barker's understanding of the Men in Black was deeply rooted in his personal encounters and documentation. 2 critical meetings, one in a hotel hallway and another on a back road in West Virginia, revealed a consistent pattern. Each encounter shared the same eerie characteristics: a stillness in the air, compressed sound, pale faces, and flat voices. By piecing together Bender's story with similar accounts, Barker created what became known as the first public outline of the Men in Black phenomenon. This work sparked debate, with critics accusing him of embellishment while supporters argued he was mapping the edges of a deliberate effort to keep the UFO question unresolved. The encounters followed a predictable sequence. A UFO sighting would be reported, followed by a visit from mysterious individuals. Witnesses would then withdraw, and sometimes evidence would vanish or be rendered meaningless. These visitors never needed explanations and left without names or credentials, their parting words carrying more weight than any formal threat. By the late 1960s, Barker realized he was no longer just an observer. He had been in the hallway, seen the car, and understood the unspoken rule. Sightings were only part of the mystery. The real story was in the visits that followed, moments when you suddenly knew your narrative was no longer solely yours. On May 23, 1964, one such mysterious event unfolded at Burgh Marsh near Soway FTH in Cumbria, England. Jim Templeton, a fireman from Carlisle, took his wife Annie and young daughter Elizabeth to this quiet, open location. Using his camera, he captured 3 photographs of Elizabeth sitting on the grass in a light blue dress. 2 photos appeared normal, but the middle frame contained an unexpected detail: a tall, white figure standing behind Elizabeth. The figure was bulky with smooth, rounded shoulders and head. Neither Jim nor Annie had seen anyone in the area, and the marsh was empty, making an unnoticed arrival or departure impossible. When the film was developed, the figure was undeniable. Friends encouraged Templeton to involve the police, who found nothing suspicious in the image. While working at the Carlisle fire station, he became involved in an unexpected situation when a local paper published an image that quickly gained national attention. The photograph, confirmed by Kodak as a single untampered exposure, depicted what was called the Soway FTH spaceman. Journalists began asking questions, but Templeton had no theories, just the photograph. Soon after, 2 men arrived at the fire station, without warning, tall, clean-shaven, and wearing dark suits with white shirts and narrow ties. They introduced themselves only as numbers 9 and 11. Their manner was polite, yet oddly formal, almost rehearsed. Claiming to be from the government without specifying which department, they asked Templeton to accompany them back to Burgh Marsh. During the drive in a dark sedan, they spoke minimally, focusing only on whether he still had the negatives and if he had shown them to anyone. At the marsh, their questioning became more intricate. They inquired about weather conditions, wind direction, aircraft presence, and Templeton's exact location and observations, despite repeated assurances that the afternoon had been calm and uneventful. One man persistently asked if Templeton was certain he hadn't seen anyone. A particularly unsettling moment came when they asked if he believed the figure was connected to recent news. When Templeton expressed uncertainty, the man seemed to imply he might be withholding information. Abruptly, their tone shifted. They exchanged a brief glance, ended the questioning, and advised Templeton to forget the matter. As quickly as they arrived, they left, walking to their car and driving away, leaving Templeton standing alone on the marsh. He never saw them again. Their cryptic behavior, referring to each other by numbers, refusing identification, and suggesting he forget everything, left a lasting unease. In later interviews, Templeton would reflect that these men seemed more interested in something beyond understanding the photograph itself. Not a few months after his visit to the marsh, Templeton was approached at home by another pair of men in suits. Their tone was less formal than previous encounters, but their questions remained similar. While they identified themselves only as investigators, Templeton suspected they were connected to the earlier two visitors. They continued to probe his memory of that day, asking whether he had seen or heard anything unusual. Around this time, an Australian reporter contacted him with an intriguing claim. Figures resembling the one in his photograph had reportedly been spotted at the Woomanair test range during a missile launch. These figures, described as white-clad and helmeted, were seen inside a restricted area, causing test delays. The reporter mentioned photographs existed, though none were ever released. The timing struck Templeton as significant. The Woomera incident was said to have occurred within days of his photograph, but he could never confirm the details. Both Australian and British authorities remained silent, offering no official commentary. If any connection existed between the events, it remained hidden. As years passed, Templeton noticed official interest had not completely disappeared. He began receiving letters from people claiming to have seen similar figures in remote areas, often near military installations or test sites. Some correspondents even reported being questioned afterward by unidentified men. By the 1970s, his photograph had appeared in books and television programs about unexplained phenomena. The men in dark suits were frequently mentioned alongside it, drawing parallels to other cases where witnesses of unusual events reported visits from anonymous officials. The story continued to circulate, sparking debate. Skeptics argued the spaceman could have been Annie Templeton briefly entering the frame, her dress overexposed to appear white. Proponents countered that the figure was taller and broader than Annie, with a helmet-like head and rigid stance that didn't match her proportions. Both Templeton and Annie insisted she had been several yards away at the time. In UFO research circles, such accounts were informally grouped under the Men in Black label. Though Templeton rarely used the term, he began to wonder whether his experience was part of a larger pattern. Two formal men, dressed professionally and moving with purpose, arrived unexpectedly and questioned Templeton in depth, instructing him to forget what he had witnessed. The speculation surrounding these mysterious visitors ranged widely. Some believed they were intelligence officers or private contractors connected to defense agencies. The incident's location near military testing ranges in the UK, coupled with references to Woomera, suggested the interest might focus on something accidentally captured in background equipment rather than extraterrestrial activity. Others, more drawn to paranormal explanations, viewed the encounter as an intentional effort to suppress sightings of unexplained entities. Throughout the entire ordeal, Templeton remained steadfast. He never sought financial gain from his experience, refusing payment for exclusive rights and only allowing copies of the photograph for analysis. Decades later, the Solway case continued to intrigue researchers as a compelling intersection between photographic evidence and unexplained official intervention. Analysts universally agreed the negative was genuine and unaltered, though significant disagreement persisted about the figure's identity and the reason behind the subsequent visits. Central questions remained unanswered. If the figure was human, who were they and why did they appear? If not of earthly origin, why were Templeton's observations deemed so sensitive? The case remains suspended in uncertainty, neither conclusively debunked nor definitively proven. For enthusiasts of photographic mysteries, this incident represented a rare example of an image that survived technical scrutiny while simultaneously drawing its creator into an enigmatic encounter. More profoundly, it underscored how the most compelling mysteries often center not on what is seen, but on who arrives asking questions afterward. A strange atmosphere began to take shape in the town locals, simply called the TNT area. Reports started trickling in through the local paper, but it was what followed those initial accounts that truly captured people's attention. Mary Heyer, the Athens Messenger's Point Pleasant correspondent, became the central point for collecting unusual stories. Her usual work involved interviewing people about floods and county fairs, but suddenly her office transformed. Visitors began sharing accounts of extraordinary events: a shadow passing low over a barn roof, red lights drifting across the river, mysterious figures on roadsides. People from all walks of life were experiencing these encounters: farmers, shopkeepers, young couples, and even a school teacher started reporting strange visits. The visitors were always polite but unsettling, dressed in dark suits, arriving without warning, and rarely providing names. Something deeper was happening beyond simple statement collection. A farmer outside town, who had spoken to Heyer about seeing a winged figure in his pasture, experienced one such visit. Days after his initial report, a black sedan drove up his long gravel lane. Two tall men in dark coats and hats asked to clarify details about his account. What disturbed him most wasn't their arrival, but the feeling they already knew his answers before he spoke. Another woman who reported strange lights over the Ohio River received a similar visit. Two men arrived after dark, their car idling in the street. They were polite but cold, as if rehearsing politeness. They asked precise questions about her location and the light's path, repeating her exact words back to her. When she looked outside moments after their departure, the street was empty. She hadn't even heard a car drive away. Heyer herself soon began experiencing odd occurrences, starting with silent phone calls. The underlying message was clear. Something unusual was happening, and these visitors were intent on gathering information by methods that went far beyond standard investigation. Phone lines would hang open for half a minute, occasionally interrupted by an electronic beep-beep before cutting off. In January 1967, Heyer's desk drawers started filling with more than just sighting reports. She began collecting accounts of unexpected visitors, filing them alongside creature and UFO reports. A pattern was emerging. A man walked into her office one afternoon, short, with long black hair and a stiff posture. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He asked about her articles on sightings, then abruptly shifted to discussing city lights, their colors, their regularity. After sharing what she knew, he left without another word. Witnesses started sharing increasingly strange encounters. A teenage boy told her about two men in matching coats who appeared after he'd seen something unusual. They knew impossible details: the name of her dog, where her sister worked, her mother's birthday. They didn't ask questions. They seemed to be verifying information. A local hardware store owner had a similar experience. After mentioning seeing a figure on his roof, two men visited his store while closing. They inquired about deliveries, truck schedules, and whether anything unusual had been dropped off. They left without purchasing anything. Some encounters were more subtle. A shop assistant found her written statement about red lights over the river had vanished from her home desk. A mechanic reported strangers interviewing him, then noticed the same car parked near his garage for 3 consecutive nights, motionless during daylight. While these visitors never identified themselves with a specific agency, they shared characteristics: official language, formal dress, controlled movements. Local law enforcement was aware but uncertain. A county deputy admitted witnesses had been contacted before he could investigate. They weren't ours, he told Heyer. A state trooper even recalled seeing a dark sedan with out-of-state plates parked suspiciously. Some witnesses assumed they were government investigators. Others were less convinced. The pattern suggested something deeper: a coordinated effort to gather or suppress information about unexplained sightings. Point Pleasant experienced not just a wave of unusual aerial reports, but a quieter campaign of direct contact with those who spoke up. Witnesses began to notice subtle but clear pressure not to talk to reporters or to alter certain details. Some recalled being subtly discouraged from sharing their experiences. A young couple who had been among the first to report the winged figures stopped answering their phone unless they recognized the caller. "We didn't want to deal with it anymore," the husband said decades later. A retired railroad worker who had given a detailed description of a nighttime encounter stopped talking about it even with friends. He didn't need the trouble, he told her when she asked why. The psychological impact was real. Several witnesses withdrew from public discussion entirely. They were often told flat out that they were mistaken, with witnesses remembering being treated as if they were children making up stories. In December 1967, the visits seemed to increase. More than one witness later recalled being questioned again in the days before the Silver Bridge collapsed on the 15th, killing 46 people in the freezing Ohio River. In some cases, the questions were directly about the bridge, its traffic, and the time of day people crossed, without explanation. After the collapse, the sightings of the winged figure stopped. So did most of the visits, though some witnesses received follow-up calls asking if they had noticed anything else unusual since the accident. For many, the end of the sightings didn't bring relief. Instead, it left them with unanswered questions about why they had been singled out and by whom. Speculation about the visitor's identity has varied ever since. Some believe they were federal agents sent to investigate in secrecy, though no agency has ever claimed the role. Others think they were private contractors hired by defense or intelligence organizations. More speculative theories suggest they weren't tied to any known institution at all. What stands out is the consistency of the accounts: dark cars on rural roads, pairs of men in near-identical clothing, formal speech, and precise questioning. Heyer kept her files until her death in 1970, and when researchers later examined them, they found the sighting reports and visitor accounts often intertwined, sometimes on the same page. Point Pleasant's legacy in Men in Black lore stands out like a beacon among UFO cases. Something more lurks beneath the surface than just the famous winged figure. For many who lived through those times, the real mystery wasn't what happened, but the unexpected knock at the door afterward. Their approach was always the same. No names, no explanations. Just questions. Were they gathering data, discrediting witnesses, or simply monitoring the spread of stories? Whatever their true purpose, they left behind a lingering sense that someone was watching. Always watching in the world of unexplained encounters, these men in black remain an enigma. Close yet distant, present yet somehow intangible. Are they watching you right now? We may never know, but the stories persist, haunting the edges of our understanding. On August 3rd, 1965, in Santa Ana, California, Rex Heflin's ordinary workday took an extraordinary turn. A 38-year-old highway inspector, he was used to long hours documenting road conditions. But this day would be different. While checking radio equipment on the side of Mifford Road, Heflin caught a glimpse of something unexpected. Just beyond the railroad tracks, hovering silently against the pale California sky, was a disc-shaped object. Broad, metallic, and moving, with an unsettling deliberateness. Trained to observe, Heflin raised his Polaroid camera. What he captured would change everything. Soon after, they arrived. Two men in black suits, pale faces, blank eyes. They came without warning, appearing in hallways, cars, or right at your doorstep. Some whisper they're government agents. Others suggest something far more mysterious. Their purpose was clear: to reclaim the evidence. When they left, what Heflin had captured no longer belonged to him. The photographs, the proof, vanished like a dream upon waking. The men in black remained close, never truly gone. Keep your eyes on the sky, your door locked, and your mind open to the possibilities of disclosure. He was a highway inspector, not a UFO expert, but that day, something extraordinary happened. Reaching for his ever-present Polaroid camera, Heftlin captured something unusual. With the practiced hand of someone used to documenting accident sites, he framed and photographed an object in the sky. The craft lingered just long enough for him to take multiple shots. One frame revealed a smoky rim-like trail stretching across the sky. Suddenly, the object tilted, accelerated, and vanished from view. At that moment, Heftlin was focused purely on the act of photographing. When the Polaroids developed, they showed something unmistakable, a structured disc with a domed center against the California horizon. Initially, he shared the images with colleagues at the California Division of Highways. Reactions varied. Some laughed, others frowned, but no one could deny the image's clarity. The photographs quickly spread. The Santa Ana Register printed them in black and white, and within days, they were circulating nationally. Taken by a government employee in daylight using a Polaroid, the images carried an undeniable credibility. The public response was immediate. Letters arrived. Researchers called. Heftlin found himself at the center of one of the decade's most compelling UFO sightings. Days after publication, a phone call came to his office. The caller identified himself as a NORAD representative. His tone was calm and mechanical. The Air Force needed the original Polaroids for analysis, a request that seemed to allow no refusal. Something about the call felt rehearsed, but Heftlin agreed. Soon after, two men appeared at his office, tall, dressed identically in black suits, white shirts, and narrow ties. They seemed unusual. Their faces were pale, their movements precise. No identification, no badges, just a direct approach. Heftlin, one said. Heftlin watched as the black sedan pulled away quietly from the government vehicle lot, without ever checking in at the base's entry point. The photographs were never returned. When the men first arrived, they insisted on receiving the originals immediately, their tone polite but heavy with an authority that crushed potential resistance. Their arrival had been sudden and unnerving. They represented official channels, though details remained vague when Heftlin asked about their affiliation. Reluctantly, he opened his desk and handed over the Polaroids. The men thanked him curtly, turned in unison, and departed. The unmarked sedan began appearing with unsettling frequency. Sometimes it was parked across from Heflin's home, other times down the street from his office. Always the same, dark, silent, with two figures seated inside. The most disturbing moment came one evening when his daughter answered a knock at the front door. Two men in suits stood outside, asking to speak with her father. Their questions were disturbingly specific. Had he taken additional photographs? Had he shared copies? Were negatives hidden in the house? When Heftlin confronted them, they offered no argument or explanation. They simply turned, walked in synchronized step to their sedan, and drove off in silence. What truly frightened him was not their words, but their movement. Synchronized, expressionless, as if choreographed beyond human habit. Psychological pressure mounted. Heftlin altered his routines dramatically. He circled blocks before entering his driveway, drew blinds at night, and carefully scanned the street before speaking. At work, conversations would stop when he entered. Colleagues whispered that someone from OSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, had been asking questions about him. Warnings not to pursue the matter further were subtle but clear. Home dinners became tense affairs. His daughter recalled how he would pause mid-meal, glancing out the window, scanning the street, always waiting for something. A knock, a call. It was always there, she later said. The visitor's silence spoke louder than any threat, a presence pressing down without uttering a word. While Heftlin lived under this shadow, researchers from NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, studied the surviving photograph copies, following a different narrative path. The Heflin photographs remained a mystery that challenged official narratives. Digital scans of surviving copies underwent expert analysis, finding no evidence of trickery. The images appeared to be genuine single-exposure Polaroids of a structured object in the sky. As a highway inspector, Heflin was not seeking UFO fame, yet his life was profoundly reshaped by the encounter. Friends noticed changes. He became quieter, more guarded, less at ease. He measured his words carefully and watched the street before speaking. Analysts initially concluded the images were among the most convincing UFO evidence of the era. However, the Air Force, through Project Blue Book, dismissed the case. The official explanation suggested the photos could have been staged or misidentified. A striking contradiction emerged. If the photographs were worthless, why did men invoking NORAD and OSI come to seize the originals? Why had Heftlin's family endured silent surveillance? The public line was dismissal, but behind it lay quiet suppression. Heftlin later told a confidant, "They just needed me to remember." This sentence captured the essence of the Men in Black phenomenon: control through the pressure of being watched, with the understanding that silence was safer than speech. The originals, the clearest and most important evidence, never resurfaced. For researchers, the Heftlin photographs became more than just images of a disk in daylight. They represented a pattern echoing through other accounts. A witness captures something extraordinary, men arrive under the guise of official authority, evidence disappears, and silence follows. The case left investigators with persistent questions. Why would men claiming connections to NORAD and OSI go to such lengths to recover photographs the Air Force publicly dismissed as inconclusive? Why had Heftlin's family endured silent surveillance if the incident was meaningless? Heftlin's story came to stand as one of the clearest examples of how physical evidence and human testimony could be swallowed by an unseen machinery of suppression, leaving more questions than answers. They revealed the shadows that descended afterward. The ordinary landscape of Myford Road now carries little memory of what once happened here, looking like any other stretch of Southern California asphalt where commuters pass without a second thought. Rex Heftlin understood that the true weight of the story extended far beyond the disc he photographed. It was about the nameless, precise men who moved like shadows in daylight, leaving behind no documents, no official trace, only the absence of photographs and the silence that followed. What remained was not just an image of an object in the sky, but a reminder of how easily evidence can vanish and how quietly a life can be reshaped by unseen hands. The photographs spoke once, but their silence has lasted longer. Perhaps that silence was always the point. For Ralph and Judy Rankin of New Jersey, the mystery began not in the sky, but within their own home. Strange disturbances started with a click on the telephone line, words cut short by bursts of static, voices echoing conversations already spoken, and silences that seemed intentionally placed. They were not casual observers, but active researchers, part of a growing civilian network dedicated to preserving UFO reports. Their home reflected this passion. Filing cabinets and folders filled with letters, clippings, and witness statements stood in corners of their living room and study. They corresponded with researchers across the country, sharing notes on sightings, comparing patterns, and offering support to those ridiculed for speaking out. In 1966, the Rankins found themselves on the other side of the mystery, no longer the ones asking questions, but the ones being questioned. What began with strange disturbances would culminate in a visit that left them shaken, convinced that someone or something wanted their silence. A shadow had shaped lives as much as the craft itself, and the unnerving visits that followed on the ground would become part of a story that extended far beyond a single moment, captured in a photograph, committed to uncovering the truth about unexplained phenomena. Their phone often rang with new sightings and inquiries from fellow investigators. But in the spring of 1966, something changed. Initially, it was subtle. Faint clicks on the phone line, barely noticeable interruptions breaking conversations. Then came loud static bursts that garbled words completely. When Ralph contacted the phone company, technicians found nothing wrong with the line. One evening, Judy received a chilling call. A voice repeated her previous conversations verbatim, as if playing back a recording. When she attempted to identify the caller, the line went silent. Shortly after, strange cars began appearing near their house. A black sedan with tinted windows would park nearby, just distant enough to seem random, yet always leaving before Ralph could investigate. The Rankins tried to joke about being monitored, but an underlying tension remained. They were researchers, not whistleblowers, yet someone clearly wanted them to know they were being watched. Late one afternoon, two men arrived, dressed identically in dark suits, white shirts, and narrow ties. They had pale complexions and unsettling fixed gazes. "We understand you've been collecting information," one said flatly. They requested entry, and the Rankins, uncomfortable but polite, allowed them inside. The men moved methodically through the living room, scrutinizing walls, cabinets, and neatly stacked folders. Their interrogation began immediately, demanding details about file sources, witness identities, and potential evidence. Their questioning felt clinical, more like a checklist than a conversation. Judy noticed their expressions never changed, their faces eerily mask-like and devoid of emotion. When she offered tea, they ignored her, reinforcing their mechanical demeanor. What truly unsettled the Rankins was the men's apparent comprehensive knowledge. They referenced specific details the couple believed were known only to them, hinting at a deeper, more intrusive surveillance than the Rankins had imagined. Ralph and Judy Rankin's UFO research took an unexpected turn when two unidentified men arrived at their home. These visitors moved with an air of quiet authority, spending nearly an hour asking probing questions and taking notes in small black pads. They offered no credentials, simply thanking the Rankins before departing in a dark sedan that melted into the suburban street without headlights. Something felt wrong immediately. The house seemed subtly altered. Drawers slightly open, papers shifted. Nothing was missing, but everything felt violated. That evening, Judy's unease grew into genuine fear. The men's questions had cut directly to the heart of their research, and their presence had stripped away the home's sense of security. Phone disturbances became a constant source of anxiety. Judy would answer to hear only silence or her own words echoed back at her. Ralph suspected their correspondence was being intercepted, their letters copied before reaching their destination. What had begun as enthusiastic research into UFO phenomena had transformed into a potential liability. In the months that followed, the Rankins retreated completely from UFO researchers, ceased sending reports to NECAP, and withdrew from all meetings. When questioned about their sudden change, they offered only vague explanations. "We've had some pressure, or it's best we step back." The transformation was stark. Once passionate and engaged researchers, they now avoided the subject entirely. For Judy, fear became a constant companion. Every passing car, every phone ring sparked tension. Ralph carried a deeper burden, feeling he had failed not just himself, but the entire research community built on shared trust. Their imposed silence seemed precisely what their mysterious visitors had wanted. Quietly, word of the Rankins' experience spread through UFO research circles, becoming another whispered story of unexplained intimidation. NECAP files preserved a stark account of men in black intervention targeting researchers more than witnesses. The story of Ralph and Judy Rankin reveals a chilling dimension of UFO investigation that goes far beyond simple observation. Their passionate research had drawn attention from unnamed forces, transforming their lives in unexpected ways. Friends noticed subtle changes. Ralph grew quieter, more guarded in conversation, while Judy seemed constantly alert, often glancing nervously at windows during discussions. The vibrant energy that once fueled their UFO research gradually faded into an uneasy silence. Their decision to withdraw from research wasn't casual. A deeper understanding drove them. Continued investigation might invite more intrusive visits and escalating fear. The Rankin case demonstrated that the Men in Black phenomenon targeted not just accidental witnesses, but those actively pursuing hidden truths. This suppression worked differently from simply removing evidence. Instead, it involved intimidating researchers, cutting communication lines, and weakening investigative networks. The goal was to create a pervasive silence that discouraged further inquiry. For NICAP, their account became an archive entry, a cautionary tale about the risks faced by ordinary citizens penetrating secretive domains. For the Rankins, it marked a quiet turning point that effectively ended their research. Today, their names are barely remembered outside UFO research circles. Their house has changed hands, its new occupants unaware of the profound questions once explored within its walls or the unsettling visitors who once crossed its threshold. The encounter endures as a warning. Silence isn't just imposed on those who witness, but on those who seek understanding. Physical evidence can vanish, but when investigators themselves become afraid, the resulting silence runs deeper and more complete than any deliberate suppression. Ultimately, the Rankin story transcends two mysterious men in black suits. It speaks to the fragility of human inquiry when confronted with forces that resist exposure. The summer of 1978 brought an unexpected encounter for Sheila Franklin, a 29-year-old office secretary living in Indianapolis. Her life was unremarkable, centered on work, church, and family, with no prior interest in UFOs beyond casual curiosity. One evening while driving home, she spotted something extraordinary, a disc-shaped craft hovering silently above a field glowing from its edges. The sighting lasted only a minute or two before the object shot upward and disappeared. Startled, she shared her experience with a coworker who encouraged her to document the event and contact an investigator. Sheila cautiously followed that advice, giving a brief phone interview. She believed that would be the end of it. Until the night everything changed. Just after sunset, a sharp knock echoed against the Franklin home's front door. Through the curtain, Sheila saw two men in dark suits, their faces pale and expressions unnervingly flat. An odd sight in the heavy Indiana summer heat. When she cracked open the door, one man spoke her name with unsettling certainty. "We need to speak with you about what you saw," he said, his voice low and authoritative, yet they showed no identification, offered no explanation for their knowledge of her. Sheila stepped back instinctively as the men crossed her threshold. Their movements were deliberate, their presence oppressive. In that moment, she realized that the true danger wasn't what she had witnessed in the sky weeks earlier, but who had now come to erase it. Her story emerged not from a desire for publicity, but because friends and family noticed the profound change in her after the encounter. MUF field investigators eventually documented her testimony, revealing how a simple sighting could transform into a moment of profound intimidation. Miss Sheila's encounters began with two men who knew intimate details about her experience, specifics she had never made public. Their questions seemed less like genuine curiosity and more like methodical verification. They probed her relentlessly. How long had her car been stopped? Had she taken photographs? Spoken to anyone besides her coworker? Her intention to contact the UFO group became a focal point at their interrogation. One man carried a small notepad, though he never wrote anything down. The other sat rigidly, staring at her without blinking. Sheila later described their interaction as mechanical, like listening to a rehearsed recording. Her hesitation prompted a shift in their tone, with firm advice to forget what she had seen. Their words weren't shouted or overtly threatening, but carried an unmistakable weight. After several minutes, they abruptly left, walking to a black sedan that pulled away unusually quietly. Sheila watched from the window, shaken until their taillights disappeared. In the days that followed, an unsettling sense of surveillance consumed her. A dark, unmarked car would idle down her street, always occupied by two figures. When she noticed it, the vehicle would vanish the moment she considered approaching. Strange occurrences multiplied. Her phone line began clicking and popping during calls. Once, she heard a faint echo of her own voice, suggesting another line was listening. A coworker's joke about government interest only heightened her anxiety. Her behavior changed dramatically. She moved curtains carefully, checked the street before opening her door, and stopped taking evening walks. Neighbors observed her transformation, once friendly and talkative. She became subdued, her smile fading, her answers growing shorter. 2 weeks after the mysterious visit, she discovered her living room, subtly disturbed. A lamp had been moved, papers on her desk rearranged. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. Sheila had experienced something she couldn't explain, and it changed everything. Her notebook, which contained details of her sighting, was missing. When she told a close friend, her voice trembled with an unmistakable fear. Her whole demeanor shifted dramatically after the encounter. Friends who had known her for years noticed the transformation. She stopped chatting casually at work, often staring out the window as if constantly alert. One coworker remembered her whispering, "It's not the light I'm afraid of. It's the men." The strange visit left her terrified. She unplugged her phone at night and stopped answering the door unless she recognized who was knocking. To her family, she explained only that she had said too much and it was best to drop the subject. When her sister pressed her, Sheila's face tightened. "You don't understand," she said. "It's not safe." Investigators found her reluctant to cooperate. She confirmed the basics of her sighting but grew visibly anxious when asked about the visit. She admitted 2 men had arrived and delivered a warning, but would say no more. "They told me not to talk," she whispered. "I shouldn't even be saying this." What troubled researchers most was the specificity of the men's knowledge. They knew details only her coworker and the MUFON field investigator had been told. They referenced her intent to continue with the UFO group, though she had never discussed this outside a single phone call. When MUFON investigators checked with local police about the visit, the answer was clear. No officers had been sent. The police denied any knowledge and insisted they had no reason to interfere with her report. The men had carried themselves with official confidence, but no agency claimed them. Their credentials dissolved under scrutiny. Sheila wanted to believe she could turn to someone for protection, some agency that would explain what happened. Instead, she found only denial and silence. The absence of explanation became its own haunting answer. Her case never became a headline, never appeared in newspapers. Sheila Franklin's UFO encounter was different from earlier high-profile cases of the 1950s and 60s, where those incidents involved seized photographs and physical evidence. Her experience was marked by a subtle, more insidious approach to silencing. MUFO researchers found her case particularly unsettling, not because of dramatic details, but because of its profound psychological impact. She had no physical proof, no debris, no photographs, no sensational abduction narrative. Her testimony alone was enough to trigger a visit from mysterious men determined to ensure her silence. The aftermath was telling. Friends noted how dramatically she changed, withdrawing from any discussion of her experience. When researchers approached her, she would only confirm that she had been told to forget. The weight of that instruction pressed down on her, making silence seem her only safe refuge. What intrigued investigators was not just her story, but its consequences. They observed her transformation from an open, curious person to someone consumed by fear and a sense of constant surveillance. The street where she lived in 1978, now an ordinary Indianapolis neighborhood, bears no trace of that pivotal moment. Her memory remained vivid. She recalled the pale faces, the flat voices that seemed to know her intimately. The warning to stay silent was delivered without overt threat, yet it settled deeply into her consciousness. She understood. They knew everything she had tried to keep private. The men who visited her represented a shift in how potential witnesses were managed. No longer were they seizing evidence. Instead, they were systematically undermining credibility through psychological pressure. Her case became a quiet reference point among researchers, illustrating this nuanced approach to suppression. Decades later, the legacy of her encounter lies not in what was seen in the sky, but in the profound personal transformation it triggered. The black sedan, the unexplained visitors, the sense of being watched, these became more significant than the original sighting itself. The Sheila Franklin story reveals a deeper pattern underlying decades of men in black encounters. Her experience isn't just another UFO narrative. It's a stark reminder that some phenomena extend far beyond isolated incidents. The encounters left an undeniable mark. Witnesses like Franklin found themselves confronted by men whose very presence seemed designed to erase what they had seen. Evidence would vanish. Testimonies would dissolve into silence. Researchers recognized this wasn't limited to prominent figures or early UFO investigations. It reached into ordinary lives, suggesting something more complex was at work. Were these visitors truly government agents, or something mimicking human form? Their interactions left no traceable record, yet their impact was profound. Faces blank, voices flat, a lingering presence that extended well beyond their actual visit. Dan Sherman's experience in mid-1970s Illinois echoes this pattern. After reporting a UFO sighting a glowing object moving unusually across the street line, he found himself under quiet, persistent surveillance. A dark sedan would idle on his street corner, always in the same spot, always when he returned home. What began as a brief, seemingly innocuous event transformed into months of calculated observation. Sherman realized this wasn't a standard investigation. Something stranger was unfolding, a systematic erosion of normalcy conducted by silent, watchful figures. The original sighting was simple, an oval, luminous object moving silently overhead, pale blue-white, tilting before fading into clouds. Sherman reported it casually to local authorities and a regional UFO group. No photographs, no physical evidence, just his testimony. But it didn't end there. The aftermath suggested a deeper, more unsettling narrative about encounters that challenge our understanding of surveillance, identity, and the unknown. Strange encounters unfolded across the Midwest, with UFO sightings dominating local newspapers. For Sherman, these events would become more than just stories. Weeks after initial reports, an unsettling pattern emerged. A dark sedan began appearing consistently at the end of his street. Two men sat inside, always watching, never moving. They remained in the vehicle, their presence both constant and enigmatic. At first, Sherman rationalized their presence. Perhaps they were visitors or neighbors with an unusual routine. But the frequency and timing grew increasingly suspicious. The car appeared late at night when the street was silent, and early in the morning before anyone else stirred. When Sherman approached, the men displayed an unnerving stillness, with movements that seemed almost mechanical. Something felt deeply wrong. Sherman started documenting everything. He sketched license plates that seemed to change inexplicably, sometimes bearing out-of-state tags, sometimes appearing blank. Small disruptions in his home became noticeable. Drawers would be slightly open. Chairs would shift imperceptibly. Papers on his desk looked subtly rearranged. Stranger still, his phone line developed peculiar characteristics. Static would interrupt calls. Sometimes, picking up the receiver revealed only silence, followed by an abrupt disconnection. He changed locks and had his phone line checked, but no explanation emerged. The men's behavior grew more bizarre. Neighbors began noticing too. They described the car as motionless for hours, the occupants sitting like statues. When Sherman suggested involving authorities, people became hesitant. If their government, one neighbor warned, we'd only cause trouble for ourselves. Over time, Sherman became convinced these were not ordinary surveillance agents. Their synchronicity was unnatural. On one occasion, he observed both men turning their heads in perfect unison, their pale faces illuminated by dashboard light, a movement too precise to be human. Sherman's life changed dramatically after encounters with a mysterious sedan that seemed to watch him. Initially, the vehicle sat parked nearby, drawing little attention. An officer passed by without stopping, and the car remained motionless, as if deliberately avoiding scrutiny. Determined to understand, Sherman approached the vehicle himself. As he walked closer, the men inside made no move. Suddenly, when he was just 20 feet away, the sedan's headlights flashed on, and it drove away smoothly and deliberately, as if his approach triggered a predetermined departure. The incident transformed Sherman's entire existence. He began altering his routines obsessively, circling blocks before turning onto streets and leaving lights on in every room at night. Sleep became shallow, interrupted by imagined sounds, phantom knocks, or distant engine hums. Friends noticed his withdrawal, observing how he became consumed by a pervasive feeling of being watched. "I don't mind them asking questions," he told a confidant. "What I mind is never knowing when they'll be here or what they've already done inside my house." Constant surveillance slowly eroded his sense of security, pushing him toward paranoia. He stopped reporting additional sightings, even when unusual lights appeared again, believing it wasn't worth the visit. His family bore witness to his transformation. A cousin remembered Sherman avoiding holiday gatherings, citing fears of leaving his house unattended. His sister recalled hushed phone conversations, speaking in whispers as though someone might be listening. Though the beings in the car never spoke or entered his home, their mere presence dismantled his trust in ordinary life. Sherman's experience occurred during a peculiar moment in UFO investigative history. Project Blue Book had closed in December 1969, leaving the Air Force without a formal public investigation program. However, interest hadn't disappeared. The Office of Special Investigations remained active, interviewing witnesses in sensitive cases. Yet nothing about Sherman's encounters matched standard investigative protocols. Regional UFO groups documented his testimony, noting details about the car and home disturbances. Some suggested possible FBI involvement, acknowledging that surveillance of UFO witnesses wasn't unprecedented in the 1950s and 60s. But again, the behavior deviated from typical bureau procedures, leaving Sherman's case shrouded in uncertainty. The experience of Dan Sherman became a study in silent intimidation. His home felt like a glass box where privacy was an illusion. Unmarked cars would materialize and vanish without explanation, leaving behind an unsettling sense that he was constantly watched. Sherman tried to understand what was happening. He reached out to a local police captain he knew, hoping to confirm the surveillance. The captain's response was telling. Initially dismissive, he became cryptic when pressed about potential outside agency involvement. "If they are watching, you wouldn't want to know," he warned. Over time, Sherman's world shrank. He stopped trusting his own routines, locks, and phone. Neighbors became potential informants. His notes became increasingly frantic, filled with dates and sketches of mysterious vehicles. Small incidents reinforced his growing paranoia, finding his radio tuned to an unfamiliar frequency, discovering his back door unlocked when he was certain he'd secured it. What haunted Sherman most was the absolute silence of these visitors. They didn't demand information or make threats. Their mere presence was the message. If they had asked for the story, I would have told it, he later recalled. But they just wanted me to know they were here. Reality became fluid. He constantly questioned his memories. Had he truly locked that door? Moved that chair? The line between what was real and what might have been manipulated blurred completely. Eventually, Sherman withdrew. He stopped attending UFO meetings, ceased correspondence with researchers, and cut off discussions even with close friends. This wasn't about disbelief, but survival. They want me quiet, he told a correspondent before disappearing. The mysterious surveillance gradually diminished. Cars appeared less frequently, then vanished entirely. Sherman's case faded into research archives, becoming a stark example of silent psychological pressure. Unlike other incidents involving direct threats or demands, this was pure, unspoken intimidation. For years after his encounter, Sherman felt trapped by an unseen force. It wasn't the original sighting of something unusual in the sky that altered his life, but the aftermath, the knowing that he wasn't supposed to talk. Across the quiet Illinois streets where Sherman once lived, no trace remains of the dark sedan that once idled at the corner or the men who sat inside. Yet for Sherman, the memory never faded. His experience mirrors countless other encounters with men in black. Fleeting lights vanish quickly, but the silence endures. In the closing months of 1973, Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania became a focal point of strange activity. The encounters were not just about lights in the sky, but about the visitors who followed. Their arrival was calculated, their presence unnerving. Families who had witnessed strange lights above their farms, hunters who had watched luminous objects drift through trees, and police officers who had pursued glowing crafts down back roads all experienced similar visitations. Men in dark suits would arrive with a deliberate, sharp knock that felt rehearsed. They introduced themselves with vague authority and casual conversation. And probed far deeper than casual conversation. These visitors carried no identification, only an absolute certainty. Their voices were flat, their expressions mechanical. When they left, silence was their only signature. Researchers recognized patterns in these encounters, like the Robinson family in Maine or the Rankins in New Jersey, where the line between government interest and something more mysterious blurred. For Sherman, the experience was more personal. He had seen something unusual, reported it, and spent years feeling as though his life was placed under a microscope. His story offers a pure glimpse into the psychology of men in black activity, the power of presence without explanation, where silence itself becomes a weapon. Though often overshadowed by more sensational narratives, Sherman's account reveals the subtle, drawn-out nature of control that extends far beyond a single moment. In the fall of that year, Pennsylvania experienced one of the most intense UFO outbreaks in its history. Stan Gordon, a young investigator from Greensburg, found himself at the center of an extraordinary series of events. From September through November, reports cascaded in from all corners. Farmers, police officers, and entire families described surreal encounters. Strange discs and luminous spheres glided low over fields. Beams of light reached down from tree lines. Some witnesses even spoke of encountering tall, strange figures, moving with an unnatural gait. Gordon's phone never stopped ringing. He meticulously documented each report, filling notebooks with handwritten statements and marking county maps with pins. Local newspapers published stories of glowing craft seen by multiple witnesses on the same night. Police dispatchers logged calls about objects moving at speeds too fast for helicopters and too low for conventional aircraft. One farmer described a disc hovering over his pasture, sending beams of light through the fog and startling his cattle. Another family watched a glowing object cross silently over Route 30, illuminating the inside of their car. State troopers joined the pursuit. chasing unidentified objects down winding country roads, only to watch them shoot skyward and vanish. That the sightings were only half the story. Soon after the reports reached the press, witnesses began experiencing something more unsettling. Mysterious visitors started showing up at their doors. A farmer who had watched a glowing disc hover above his barn received an unexpected knock. Two men in dark suits, clearly out of place in rural Pennsylvania, introduced themselves as officials, though they never specified from where. Their questioning was precise and unnerving. What time did the object appear? How many people saw it? Were photographs taken? When the farmer hesitated, one man leaned closer and said chillingly, "We already know more than you've told anyone." This statement shocked the farmer, who had only shared details with Stan Gordon. Another family who had witnessed a luminous sphere drifting over a cornfield reported a similar visit. The men inquired whether they had spoken to reporters. Upon learning they had, the visitor's demeanor turned cold. "That was unwise," one of them said flatly. "You should avoid speaking further." A retired steelworker's encounter with mysterious visitors began when he called state police after seeing lights above a quarry. Two men who claimed to represent the Air Force showed up, fixated on whether he had taken photographs. Upon learning he had not, they immediately lost interest and departed without further discussion. Weeks later, when he contacted the local Air Force detachment at Pittsburgh International to verify the visit, he was informed that no such investigators had been sent. The visitor's lack of official credentials was striking. They carried no badges or identification, yet their demeanor suggested an authority that could intimidate families into silence. Witnesses found something deeply unsettling about these men. Their speech was unnaturally flat, almost robotic, as if reading from a predetermined script. Movements were stiff, faces blank. One witness told Gordon the men seemed to be learning English in real time. Similar encounters occurred elsewhere. A police officer who had chased a glowing object down a back road was later approached by a supposed Air Force representative. When asked to show credentials, the man deflected, instead demanding details about the sighting. "We don't show papers," he stated. "We ask questions." The officer's subsequent investigation revealed no record of such a person. The local Air Force base confirmed no one had been dispatched to interview him. Families reported strange interactions that suggested these men were outsiders. They mispronounced local township names and asked naive questions about roads that had been paved for decades. These errors convinced residents that the visitors were not local and possibly not who they claimed to be. A pattern emerged. Witnesses who initially spoke openly began to withdraw. Farmers retracted statements. Families who had described mysterious lights now refused further questioning. Stan Gordon noticed this shift. Once eager calls became abrupt. Scheduled follow-up meetings were suddenly canceled. One particularly disturbing incident involved a woman who had reported a glowing object near her property. She later contacted Gordon in tears, describing men who had visited her home. Their questions were invasive, probing not just about the sighting but about her family, children, and daily routines. While not overtly threatening, their intimate knowledge was deeply unsettling. Something strange happened with a man who had proudly pointed out to Gordon a scorched patch of ground, supposedly left by a UFO. When Gordon came back with colleagues, the man's attitude changed dramatically. He now claimed the mark was from a brush fire, despite having previously given a detailed and clear account. Gordon believed the man had been visited and pressured into altering his story. Officially, silence prevailed. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's UFO investigation, was in its final stages. By 1973, it had been gutted. Fewer investigators were working, budgets were dwindling, and the official position was already leaning toward shutting down. The 1969 Condon Report had provided the rationale. UFOs posed no national security threat and didn't warrant further investigation. Yet sightings continued, especially in Pennsylvania, where reports came in waves. Witnesses were often told secondhand that Air Force personnel might contact them. But the encounters described didn't match standard OSI procedures. Air Force Office of Special Investigations interviews were always documented, with credentials shown and reports filed. What Westmoreland witnesses described were very different: visitors with no identification, no paperwork, leaving no trace. Stan Gordon reached out to military contacts and was informed no official teams had been sent to Westmoreland County. Local police quietly acknowledged seeing outsiders asking questions. These men didn't coordinate with law enforcement and disappeared as quickly as they arrived. Some researchers speculated that NORAD might have been aware of the Pennsylvania sightings. Radar operators along the East Coast had logged unusual returns that season, objects with sudden accelerations and movements inconsistent with known aircraft. Internal memos later revealed NORAD was sharing information with the Air Force even as Blue Book was winding down. However, no official acknowledgement ever reached the witnesses themselves. The result was a thick cloud of uncertainty. Were these visitors connected to official channels, OSI agents, Air Force intelligence officers, or NORAD liaisons, or were they something else entirely, mimicking authority but answering to no one? For Stan Gordon and the witnesses, this lack of clarity was itself a form of intimidation, leaving them unable to distinguish fact from fiction. Between the hills of Pennsylvania, something was moving quietly during those months, blurring the line between genuine investigation and an unknown force. The psychological toll was immense. Communities in Westmoreland County became gripped by an overwhelming sense of paranoia. Witnesses who once spoke freely now felt hunted. Farmers stopped answering phones. Families kept curtains drawn, even in daylight. Children grew anxious at the sight of unfamiliar cars near their homes. A young couple who had reported a luminous craft over a ridge told Gordon they had completely stopped answering phone calls, terrified of mysterious, anonymous voices. A state trooper privately admitted he'd been warned against discussing a chase involving a glowing object, advice that effectively silenced him. Stan Gordon later reflected that the 1973 wave's most challenging aspect wasn't the number of sightings, but the number of silences. Potentially valuable testimonies were cut short. Witnesses who could have provided crucial details instead retreated into fear. The extraordinary sightings themselves were significant, but the subsequent visits left an even deeper mark. People felt not just watched, but managed. Their voices suppressed, their accounts erased through intimidation. This Westmoreland County wave is now considered one of the most significant regional UFO events in American history. Its legacy extends beyond the lights seen across Pennsylvania's hills. The true impact lies in the quiet that followed. The case revealed how black activity could amplify a UFO wave's effect, not by explaining or debunking, but by suppressing information. Witness after witness withdrew, creating irreparable gaps in the record. For Gordon, it became a profound lesson about testimony's fragility. Extraordinary events witnessed by dozens, even hundreds, could be effectively erased by a handful of quiet visitors. The hills and valleys of Westmoreland County might look unchanged, but in 1973, they harbored two mysteries: glowing discs and spheres moving silently through the night, and pale men in suits who appeared at doorsteps, spoke flatly, and left behind an enduring silence. The lights passed quickly. The silence remained, still lingering in the shadows. Give this a like. It helps us know you want more stories like these. If you're new here, subscribe so next time the men in black appear, you'll be ready to meet them. Now, let's dive in. The Cold War era was a time of strange encounters in Scandinavia between the 1950s and 1960s, Norway and Sweden became hotspots for unexplained aerial phenomena. UFO sightings were common, ranging from ghost rockets in the late 1940s to disks and spheres hovering over rural landscapes. Witnesses often reported similar experiences. Military bases like Bodø tracked mysterious objects over northern fjords. Ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, and locals, shared their stories. Some even collected physical evidence, scorched grass patches that hinted at something extraordinary. But these reports came with an unsettling twist. Strange men would appear after sightings, arriving unannounced at witnesses' homes. They dressed like officials but spoke with an odd cadence. Their Norwegian sounded learned, not natural. Questions were precise and mechanical. One early case near Trondheim involved a disc-shaped object landing briefly in a field. Witness described a glowing rim and ground-shaking vibrations. Days later, 2 men arrived claiming to be police. Their clothing was dark, their manner abrupt. When the farmer requested identification, they produced a document with an unfamiliar seal. Something seemed off. The agency name was misspelled, the typography suspicious. These encounters were not isolated incidents. Across Norway and Sweden, witnesses reported similar visits from men who looked official but moved and spoke like outsiders. In a society that trusted institutions, these interactions bred confusion and doubt. The visitors left behind more questions than answers, their presence more mysterious than the UFO sightings themselves. Men in unusual attire would arrive unannounced, questioning witnesses about unexplained sightings with an unsettling precision. The visits followed a consistent pattern. Official-looking individuals would probe for specific details, time, distance, and most critically, any physical evidence collected. Their approach was methodical but distinctly odd. Witnesses described them as having an unnatural demeanor. Faces too smooth, movements too rigid, conversations too scripted. In one instance, a Norwegian couple recalled 2 visitors at their farmhouse who seemed to study the husband intensely. The wife noted their expressions appeared almost blank, as if deliberately neutralized. A Swedish school teacher experienced similar peculiarities when men investigating student drawings paused unnaturally between questions, speaking as if reciting a memorized text. The fishermen in northern Norway found the visitors particularly suspect when they asked about a train station that had never existed in his village. This revealed a fundamental disconnection from local knowledge, suggesting they had studied the area. Only through distant reports, physical evidence seemed to vanish quickly. A farmer who had secretly kept a small metal fragment found it stolen from a locked drawer weeks after his encounter. When approached about his experience, he became reticent, simply stating it is not wise to talk. Similar accounts accumulated. Whether in Sweden, Norway, or elsewhere, the encounters shared striking similarities. Men who seemed slightly out of place, questions that felt rehearsed, and a palpable sense of something not quite right. Witnesses were left unsettled, often choosing silence over further discussion. The consistent strangeness of these interactions, from awkward language to inappropriate questions, suggested something beyond routine investigation. The craft's eerie glow led him to steer clear of the lake where it first materialized. Years later, he shared with a friend that the light in the sky hadn't scared him. It was the visitors at his door who truly unnerved him. Neighbors spoke of a black car that would sit motionless near the family's home for hours, its occupants never leaving, only driving away when someone approached. The Swedish couple who had suffered scorched vegetation on their land shied away from any media contact. Their children were instructed never to discuss the men who had visited. A local school teacher, deeply disturbed by his students' drawings, locked them away and stopped encouraging any further reporting of sightings. To his colleagues, he cryptically noted that some things are not meant to be understood. Time and again, witnesses found that it wasn't the initial sighting that silenced them, but the subsequent visit. When people sought official confirmation, they met only with contradictions. A Trondheim farmer brought a strange document to the police station, one shown to him by the effective set of history. Officers quickly dismissed it as a forgery, pointing out misspellings and poor print quality. They claimed no investigators had been sent and no one recognized the signatures. In Yuma, a fisherman inquired about the supposed technical ministry. Local officials insisted no such department existed, suggesting the men were simply pranksters. But he knew better. How could pranksters know the exact time he went to bed? The visitors had asked precisely about his nightly routine. A Swedish constable privately admitted to a researcher that he'd received 3 or 4 similar complaints. People consistently reported visits from suited men following UFO sightings, always vanishing without explanation. It deeply troubled him. If they are not ours, he wondered aloud, then whose are they? These institutional denials left witnesses more unsettled than ever. They had trusted their authorities, but those same authorities refused to acknowledge the encounters. What remained was a pervasive uncertainty and a growing suspicion of something operating beyond official oversight. For those who experienced these visits, the weight was immense. A Norwegian farmer described the encounter as suffocating, feeling as though the very air had been altered by their presence. A fisherman admitted he avoided his own boat for months, not because of the UFO, but because of the fear that the men would return. Taken from the room, a Swedish teacher later told researchers that speaking to the visitors was like talking to a photograph. Their presence was real but hollow, their responses automatic. In the days following the encounter, some reported physical symptoms: dizziness, fatigue, headaches. Others simply withdrew from social life. A woman instructed her daughter never to repeat the family sighting outside the home, warning her that the men come back when you talk. The Scandinavian men in black, MID, reports remain among the earliest and clearest European examples of the phenomenon. They showed that whatever force lay behind these encounters was not confined to one country. In small towns and villages, ridicule already kept many silent. The visits added something heavier. The feeling that not only neighbors but powerful strangers wanted them quiet. The pattern repeated with unnerving regularity. A sighting reported, a witness questioned, a sample taken, or a file disturbed, and silence imposed. The lights themselves left no permanent trace, but the men who followed ensured that what evidence remained was erased as the lesson was plain. The mystery of the lights in the sky was only part of the story. The rest unfolded at doorsteps and in quiet living rooms where ordinary people were confronted by strangers who wore authority but did not embody it. For the witnesses themselves, the memory endured long after the lights faded. They were left with the image of men whose humanity seemed incomplete, who borrowed the appearance of officials but behaved like imposters. Their presence lingered in memory like a shadow, less dramatic than the disk in the sky, but far more disturbing. Today, the farms and fjords of Scandinavia carry little visible trace of those visits. The ghost rockets of the 1940s are remembered as Cold War curiosities. The disks and lights of the 1950s and 60s as unexplained mysteries. But for those who once opened their doors to strangers in black coats, the story was different. They remember the mismatched papers, the awkward voices, the stiff movements. They remember the draining sense that they had not spoken to men at all, but to something wearing the shape of men. And above all, they remember the silence that followed, heavy, deliberate, and enduring. In the summer of 1967, a family living near Niagara Falls experienced something extraordinary. While taking an evening walk, their peaceful night was interrupted by an unexpected sight. High above the misty waters, strange lights appeared, moving in ways no conventional aircraft could. The children pointed, wondering if what they saw might be fireworks or stars. But these weren't typical celestial or man-made phenomena. The lights hovered and darted with an almost intelligent quality, pausing as if studying the landscape below. For several minutes, the family watched in stunned silence, transfixed by the impossible aerial display. As suddenly as they arrived, the lights vanished into the darkness. The family returned home unsettled, but decided to keep their encounter private. No police reports, no newspaper calls, no official communications, just a secret shared within their home. Or so they thought. Days later, two men in dark suits arrived unannounced. Their appearance was unnervingly precise. Black coats, white shirts, narrow ties, and expressions devoid of emotion. "We'd like to speak about what you saw near the falls," one said. The father was shocked. He hadn't told anyone about the incident, not colleagues, neighbors, or even family. Yet these strangers spoke as if they had witnessed everything firsthand. They entered the house without a full invitation, moving through the living room with calculated deliberation, scanning photographs and papers. This became one of the few documented men in black cases in Canada. More than just a strange nighttime sighting, it was a chilling reminder that unexplained phenomena respect no borders. The family's brief encounter with the unknown didn't end at the river. It followed them home, carried by the mysterious pale men who appeared afterwards. Here's the rewritten text. The aftermath was immediate and unsettling. In the corners of the room, strangers with official appearances asked rapid-fire questions. Their faces remained unreadable as they pressed the family about the details of their experience. What time did they arrive at the falls? Had they taken photographs? When the father repeatedly confirmed no camera was used, the men exchanged a brief, knowing glance. One man pressed again, more firmly, about the absence of photographic evidence. Without further discussion, they simply stood and left. The entire encounter lasted less than 20 minutes, but its impact would be profound and lasting. After the door closed, the family sat in complete silence, each member turning the strange interaction over in their minds. The mystery ran deeper than their unexpected visitors. How could these men know such specific details about an event never publicly shared? The location, the timing, all seemed to suggest something far beyond a chance encounter. That night, children refused to sleep alone. The father remained vigilant in the kitchen, watching the dark street. Every set of passing headlights made him tense. Ordinary sounds, the creak of floorboards, the refrigerator's hum, now carried a watchful, ominous weight. Neighbors soon noticed the family's changed behavior. Children no longer played freely outside. Curtains remained drawn more often. When asked about their weekend, parents gave minimal, guarded responses, carefully avoiding any mention of the incident. They never reported the encounter to authorities, believing such action might invite the men's return. Instead, their story spread quietly, shared years later with researchers who documented the case in private files. What remained was not just the mystery of strange lights above the falls, but the greater enigma of those who arrived afterward, official-looking yet offering no identification. Their speech was flat, their questions invasive. Years later, grown children would describe their lingering unease. It wasn't just that they knew what we saw, they recalled. It was that they knew what we didn't do. They seemed desperate for proof that no proof existed. The sighting transformed from a wondrous shared secret to a source of deep dread. The father, once sociable, gradually withdrew. Something fundamental had shifted in their world. In 1967, Canada was swept up in a wave of UFO sightings, with reports coming from both civilian groups and official agencies like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the National Research Council. Multiple high-profile incidents drew international attention that year. Near Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, a glowing object crashed into the water. Local police officers and multiple witnesses reported the event, prompting the Canadian Coast Guard to search the area. Despite logging by Canadian and American authorities, including NORAD, no official explanation was ever provided. During that summer, radar units along the U.S.-Canadian border tracked unidentified aerial objects, noting extraordinary speeds and maneuvers beyond known aircraft capabilities. These incidents were quietly recorded in internal logs and memoranda between defense officials. Against this backdrop, a particular incident in Niagara Falls took on new significance. It was part of a broader pattern of unexplained aerial phenomena, where witnesses were experiencing something extraordinary and then being subtly discouraged from discussing it. The family at the center of the Niagara Falls encounter was profoundly affected. The mother became protective, refusing to let her children wander the neighborhood after dark. Years later, the memory of men knocking at the door overshadowed even the mysterious lights in the sky. Though they never filed a formal report, their story reached Canadian researchers who saw it as part of the rare accounts of men in black activity outside the United States. For researchers, the case illustrated how the phenomenon crossed borders, appearing even where official investigations were limited. The children grew up, changed by the experience, more cautious, more private, more wary of strangers. The memory of the knock at the door became inseparable from the memory of lights over the falls. While the case never achieved the fame of other UFO encounters, its quiet weight endures as a reminder of something unexplained. The UFO itself was distant, silent, and fleeting. But the men who followed were close, deliberate, and unforgettable. The strange encounters with unknown visitors weren't limited to just the United States. Black suits, pale faces, mechanical questions, and impossible knowledge cropped up in Ontario just as they had in Santa Ana, New Jersey, and Maine. Millions of visitors each year marvel at Niagara Falls, watching water cascade into mist. But few know about the family who stood at its edge in 1967, witnessing something extraordinary, lights moving across the night sky at impossible speeds. Even fewer understand what happened next, the knock at the door, the pale men asking questions no ordinary person should know. For that family, the falls transformed from a natural wonder into something more sinister. A stark reminder that what you see can follow you home, and silence can be demanded not just by what hovers above, but by those who arrive afterward. The story of Jose Antonio da Silva begins far from bustling cities, in the quiet rivers of Minas, Brazil. On May 3, 1962, a fisherman set out before dawn, carrying only his nets and the patient rhythm of his routine. He expected nothing more than the day's catch, misty waters, breaking the silence with only the splash of oars and faint bird calls. His life was defined by repetition, cast nets, wait, return home with enough fish for his family. But this morning would be different. A soft glow rose above the tree line, faint at first, then gathering intensity. Initially, he thought it might be sunrise catching the fog, yet the light moved deliberately, descending toward him until it hovered directly over the river. A domed, seamless metallic craft floated above his boat, silent, without engine noise or air disturbance. Just a brilliant humming stillness. A light beam poured down, engulfing his boat. He felt his body lift, paralyzed and weightless. What followed was a fragmented memory. Figures resembling men but moving unnaturally. Strange instruments and panels. Jose returned with a story he wished he had never told, an account of being taken aboard a craft that did not belong to this earth. For most men, such a memory would be burden enough. But for Jose, the greater weight came later, when strangers arrived to remind him that silence was safer than truth. Unseen watchers seemed to observe and communicate in sounds beyond his comprehension. A sharp, stabbing pain in his head was the last thing he remembered before darkness. When consciousness returned, he found himself on a gently rocking boat. The sun hung high overhead, his fishing nets untouched. Such a bewildering experience would have haunted anyone, But for Dilva, this was merely the beginning. His family quickly noticed the changes. Silence hung heavy around him, his clothes disheveled, his eyes filled with a strange distraction. At first, he shared only fragments with them, hesitant to reveal the full story. But in a small community, secrets rarely remain hidden. Whispers spread. Neighbors spoke of strange lights. Journalists descended, eager for details. Initially, Silva resisted, embarrassed and reluctant. Eventually, he began to speak. His account emerged, hesitant but consistent. A fisherman taken aboard an unknown craft, examined by beings not of this earth, returned with lost time. Researchers saw an extraordinary claim, part of a growing collection of South American abduction reports. For Da Silva, each retelling felt like a dangerous exposure. Weeks after the story broke, the consequences arrived. One evening, walking home along a dusty road, two men approached. They seemed out of place, tall, dressed in immaculate dark suits, their shoes gleaming as if freshly polished from a city street. Their Portuguese was correct but mechanical, spoken like a rehearsed lesson. "You must stop speaking of what you saw," one said. Silva froze. Something was fundamentally wrong. Their movements were too precise, their faces like masks mimicking humanity. No explanation, no identification, simply a direct instruction. Do not talk to reporters. Do not give interviews. Do not repeat the story. Silva protested, insisting on the truth. The men moved closer, their movements perfectly synchronized. One leaned forward, his presence threatening and unnatural, left an indelible mark on his life. What began as a brief interaction transformed everything. His family witnessed the profound change in him, noting how his demeanor shifted dramatically after that night. The men who approached him spoke with chilling precision, their presence creating an unsettling silence. Though no direct threats were made, Dilva felt deeply threatened. Their black suits melted into the twilight after just minutes, but the impact was lasting. His wife remembered his trembling voice as he recounted the encounter. His children observed how he began barring doors and zoned, pacing restlessly, constantly glancing at windows as if expecting a return. From that moment, Dilva became a different person. Reporters and researchers found themselves shut out. Where he had once been sociable, he now withdrew completely. To neighbors and relatives, he confided a growing sense of being watched, unexplained cars parked at town edges. Silent men appeared and vanished without explanation. The local fisherman who had previously spoken openly about his story now maintained a heavy silence. His absence from community gatherings became noticeable. His children recalled his constant vigilance, always checking windows, scanning roads before stepping outside, pacing rooms at night. For Dilva, the abduction was a fleeting moment, but the visit's aftermath reshaped his entire existence. He fished less frequently, avoided night travel, and grew guarded in conversations. His once steady demeanor gave way to nervous pauses. The beings who took him for hours and the men on the road who took his trust fundamentally altered his life. Within the UFO community, his case became known through early newspaper reports, but as time passed, his silence meant the story remained incomplete, with researchers unable to extract further details. And among locals, the incident involving Jose Antonio Dilva was more of a warning than a mystery. Parents cautioned their children against discussing strange lights, and neighbors whispered when the topic arose. The men in black had spread silence beyond Dilva, instilling unease throughout the community. His case became one of the clearest South American examples of an abduction followed by mysterious harassment. Researchers saw it as evidence that the UFO phenomenon extended far beyond the United States. The same pale visitors in dark suits who appeared in New Jersey and Maine were now walking dirt roads in Brazil. Years later, Brazil became the stage for Operation Plate, an extensive official UFO investigation. In the Amazonian town of Caras, entire communities reported beams of light from strange craft causing burns, illness, and deaths. The Brazilian Air Force documented photographs, radar readings, and hundreds of testimonies, many of which remained classified until the 1990s. Within these files were hints of efforts to manage witnesses and discourage open discussion. Whether through military channels or strange visitors on country roads, the message remained consistent: silence. Dilva's case was no longer isolated but foreshadowed a broader climate of intimidation. His refusal to speak and retreat into private life mirrored the fear that would spread in later years when Amazon witnesses reported not just lights in the sky, but men warning them to stay quiet. For Dilva, the legacy was deeply personal. He never sought publicity again, living out his life in cautious quiet. Neighbors remembered him not for what he claimed to have seen, but for the fear that seemed to shadow him afterward. The rivers of Minas Gerais continued to flow, carrying fishermen's nets and the weight of forgotten stories. Few remember the morning Dilva returned home, shaken, claiming he had been lifted into a craft not of this world. Fewer still recall the strangers who arrived afterward, their command sharper than any memory of light in the sky. For Dilva, the abduction was extraordinary, but it was the visit that truly endured. Men had come and gone, their presence etched in cautious glances and unspoken tensions. Ron Johnson's death on June 9, 1994, at a Missouri MUF meeting was anything but ordinary. In a crowded room, colleagues watched in stunned silence as the healthy, respected investigator collapsed mid-discussion, his case files spread before him. One moment he was sharp and articulate, the next, gone. Within the UFO investigation community, Johnson was more than just another researcher. Based in Missouri, he served as a state section director who managed local investigators with a rare blend of skepticism and openness. Witnesses trusted him. Farmers, teachers, police officers who feared ridicule found in Johnson a compassionate listener who documented their accounts with meticulous care. His approach was neither sensational nor dramatic. Johnson was thorough, his notes precise, his files meticulously organized. This very diligence, some believed, might have drawn unwelcome attention. Weeks before his sudden death, Johnson had confided in colleagues about strange encounters. 2 men in dark suits had approached him after a regional meeting, addressing him by name before formal introductions. Their message was clear and chilling: stop asking questions. The official cause of death remained elusive. Toxicology offered no definitive answers, but within MUF circles, Johnson's death was not seen as an isolated incident. The point was never to erase the memory, but to ensure it remained buried in silence. No one could definitively explain what happened that day by the river or in that meeting room, but the questions remained, unspoken yet persistent. Owen Johnson was pulled into a quiet conversation away from others, where the men's calm manner belied the sharp nature of their questions. They pressed him specifically about race samples collected from a field where a disc had been reported, wanting to know what physical evidence MUFON currently held in Missouri. Their questioning felt deliberate, almost rehearsed. Each question was delivered with a clipped, impersonal precision that made Johnson uneasy. When he tried to clarify their identity or ask who they represented, they deflected, repeating only that they came from official channels. No badge, no paperwork was offered. The encounter became more unsettling when one man leaned closer and lowered his voice. He suggested that if Johnson intended to pursue certain leads, particularly those involving physical traces, it would be better for his health to reconsider. Colleagues later recalled Johnson's visible distress after the meeting. He returned to the table shaken, breaking from his usual calm. His notes were shuffled into his folder more quickly than normal, his eyes scanning the room nervously. In the weeks that followed, he shared fragments of the story with trusted peers. Investigators remembered Johnson describing the men as official without being official. Some recalled his emphasis on their interest in not yet public files. One specific quote stood out. "They knew more about my cases than I had told anyone outside MUFON." Publicly, Johnson laughed off the encounter, joking about suits who knew too much. But those close to him recognized his nervous humor. Privately, he admitted the encounter had rattled him more than any previous skeptical challenge. His behavior began to shift subtly. At meetings, he still contributed, but with greater caution. Where he once shared details freely, he now spoke in general terms. His notes remained closed until his turn to speak, then quickly returned to his folder. At home, his family noticed changes. He drew the blinds earlier, checked the street before opening doors. His wife later admitted she didn't know the full extent of what troubled him, only that he seemed more guarded, more watchful. A close friend described it simply. Ron looked like a man who'd been reminded that someone else was watching his work. On a routine day at a MUF gathering, Johnson was doing what he always did, contributing quietly, listening carefully, managing files. He wasn't presenting a major paper or unveiling a groundbreaking discovery. During the meeting, he took a sip from his glass. Minutes later, he convulsed violently. Witnesses were stunned by the sudden and dramatic collapse. Medical help arrived immediately, but nothing could be done. For MUF members present, the shock was profound. Johnson had no known serious health problems. His death felt strangely timed and out of place, almost as if staged. The glass on the table became a silent point of speculation. Authorities moved quickly. Toxicology tests were conducted but yielded no conclusive results. No trace of poison was found, and no clear medical cause could explain his collapse. The final report simply labeled it a sudden, unexplained death. Police did not treat the incident as suspicious. To them, it was an unfortunate tragedy. When MUF members raised concerns about possible prior warnings, officials dismissed them. One investigator's stance was clear: without toxins, there could be no crime. For MUFON, this inconclusiveness was more troubling than any definitive answer. A natural cause could have been accepted, but a collapse following weeks of reported intimidation aligned too closely with darker possibilities. The impact was immediate. Johnson was well liked and widely respected. His death created a mix of grief and unease. Some insisted it was a coincidence, a tragic medical event. Others whispered about warnings, convinced his work had exposed him to forces determined to silence him. In the months following, several colleagues changed their approach. Some reduced their activity, declining cases involving physical evidence. Others continued working but became more guarded. A few withdrew from public UFO research entirely. One longtime MUFO investigator summarized their collective experience succinctly. Ron's death taught them two crucial lessons. They were vulnerable, and the lines they weren't supposed to cross would remain unknown until it was too late. Years later, another member reflected simply, the message was received. Whether Johnson died by chance or by deliberate hand, the effect remained the same. They stepped back. His death in 1994 remains officially unexplained, casting a long shadow over his work. Colleagues remember him as a man who transitioned from joking about mysterious suits to becoming increasingly guarded. His family bore the weight of his investigations, fielding countless calls from reporters and MUFON members without receiving clear answers. Johnson believed he had been warned about something significant. His wife later reflected on the hardest part of his death, not knowing whether to believe in coincidence or deliberate action. The witnesses Johnson had interviewed experienced a quieter but profound impact. Some wondered if their own cases had drawn attention that might have led to his potential intimidation. Many hesitated to share further details with MUFON, fearing unintended consequences of their testimony. Over time, Johnson's death became part of MUFON's internal history. Spoken of carefully but never forgotten, he was remembered not just for his investigations, but for the warnings he carried in his final weeks. His files took on new meaning. Every case he touched was now viewed through a lens of caution. For the broader UFO research community, Johnson's story became a stark reminder that investigators, not just witnesses, could be subject to intimidation. It suggested that the boundary between documenting and endangering oneself was far more fragile than many had assumed. Colleagues vividly recall his final moments, the collapse at the table, the glass half full, his notes still in front of him. They remember the investigator who plainly stated he had been warned. The silence that followed was heavy with unanswered questions, with colleagues withdrawing and families left wondering about the potential dangers lurking in the pursuit of truth. Johnson's real legacy was not just the cases he studied, but a chilling reminder that in UFO research, the most significant weight often comes not from lights in the sky, but from the mysterious men who appear afterward, those whose warnings carry a finality no file could ever fully capture. Keep your doors locked after dark. Your mind should stay open to dreams of disclosure. Until next time, stay vigilant and watch the skies carefully.